Okay, thank you.
You would, can you hear me? You mentioned the historian Gordon Wood. Gordon Wood also noted that in a republic, the rulers are the servants of the republic, and that in the absence of support, the authority of the government will collapse, and you could have a society where tyranny and anarchy reign. And if you look at some recent actions in the last year surrounding healthcare reform, some would suggest we're headed the same way. There's a congresswoman in Minnesota who urged her constituents not to pay federal healthcare taxes if healthcare reform became the law of the land. There are states attorney generals in various states that are suing the federal government for overreaching by requiring residents of the states to purchase health insurance. So my question is, what protections do we have to avoid going down a similar path the Roman Empire found itself heading?
Well, the fall of the Roman Empire, when it came to unrest from its citizenry, was based on the fact that many of the grievances that had been addressed were often ignored. And as we see with the example of the Minnesota Congresswoman they brought up, these are grievances that the citizenry has. And the thing is, the only thing that's going to prevent our downfall is the establishment of, is an examination of these grievances and an application. Because as Gordon Wood said, and Aristotle said earlier, that it's inevitable that we may end up in a state of nature again if we have problems amongst a ruling class and an unfavorable class. So we need to work in duality with these two to make sure that the ruling class, aka the government in this case, is working once again for the people as established by the idea of a social contract.
You spoke about how the government needs the support of the people or the consent of the governed. And one way in which we can do that regarding healthcare is that if the people do not agree with healthcare, do not agree with the bill that was just passed, is that through representation and voting, the people vote for who's representing them, who are creating these laws, who are passing these laws in Congress. So in the next election, they could vote in people who they feel further their ideals against healthcare. So in that way, change can be done, and the people can now find a new way to support their government.
And aside from in waiting to elections, you can write letters now. It's a lot easier to make contact with your representatives than it was during the Roman Republic, when it grew because of its size. But now through emails, letters, phone calls, it's a lot easier to make contact with your representatives.
You argue in your opening that the Roman Republic is the source of separation of powers theory and checks and balances. That flies directly in the face of Hamilton's assertion in Federalist 9, where he lays out the new science of politics, saying separation of powers, checks and balances were an example of a principle that was either not understood or not well either unknown to the ancients or not well understood. Was Madison just pulling or Hamilton just pulling a fast one on us in Federalist 9, do you think?
Well, I agree with Hamilton, because the Roman system had a rudimentary system of checks and balances. As we saw in their division of their Senate, they had an assembly of centuries and assembly of tribes. The assembly of tribes was to represent the common man, and the assembly of centuries was to represent the nobles. But the thing is, anytime the Council of Orders, an emergency committee to address grievances through the assembly of tribes was established, it was up to the discretion of the assembly of centuries whether or not to even put this issue in deliberation. So I feel the system of checks and balances, although it was there, wasn't applied to the best abilities that it could be.
Well, it was two separate legislative bodies, unlike a single legislative body in separate houses. What's the difference? What difference does it make?
Well, what you had in the Roman Republic was that because there were two separate bodies, that the plebeian assembly, the plebeian tribune, they had no real check over the centuries assembly, that they really couldn't change what the centuries assemblies were decreeing to the people. So really they were the voice of the people. They had no teeth to back up if they wanted to create change. So in that way, that two-body system wasn't very efficient in the check and balance and trying to separate powers, because the centuries assembly, in the end, still did contain all the power.
And as we see, because of this, the Roman plebeians and the patricians were constantly in a state of tension with one another from the founding of the Roman Republic to its demise.
Thank you.
I wanted to go back to the concept you raised about being a favored class and the fear that government would be looking after the interest of a favored class. The framers of the Constitution, were they themselves not an elite within society? How did they were they being hypocritical, and was perhaps Madison being hypocritical in making this argument when in fact society was run in the interest of a very small elite of white land-owning males?
While it is true that the founders did seem like an elite class, at the time it was almost essential that they were the ones that came together to draft our Constitution, because if they had gotten everyone involved, it would have led to too much deliberation and too much arguing among them, and they wouldn't have been able to come to a consensus. But besides this, once they were done, it's not like they said, all right, this is it, this is our Constitution. They sent it out to ratification committees, and all the states had to ratify it.
I agree that they were hypocritical, that they were a favored class, but Madison himself, he had ideals. He was an idealist. He thought of reality and he thought of the ideals, and he knew that equality and having everyone participate in a government is an ideal that we would like later down in the road for formation of our government. But the reality at the time was that because it was a fledgling nation, a new nation, this favored class, these who knew how to create a better government, who thought they could create a better government, they were the ones who were now in charge, and they were giving the vote out to only white landowning males, because perhaps giving the vote out to, say, African Americans would be such a controversial issue that it could lead to the fall of the nation.
The founders also had a strong desire to have the brightest mind, most educated people in office and at the reins of government. And as we saw in that room during the Constitutional Convention, these were the most educated people we had. I mean, I understand that they were all it was homogenous, but as we see, we have an ever-expanding definition of equality in our nation today. Even all landowning white males did not have the ability to vote until 1820 throughout the country, as states individually started passing legislation. And we see today societal change is what has often triggered our expansion of our definition of equality, because women didn't get the right to vote until the 19th Amendment. African Americans weren't considered equal, and by African Americans I mean African Americans males, until the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. And we see that today with the strikes of illegal immigrants and homosexuals. So yes, we're still fighting today with this societal change and these moving times to expand our definition of equality.
Thank you.